bookseller here. We host a ton of events every month, partnered events, trips, classes. We recently relocated both of our branch locations, Union Market and The Wharf, and we're hosting a ton of events there. So have a look at the calendar, have a look what's going on, and we have some handouts at the front as well. So I'm just going to run over a few things before we get started today. If you've not turned off your cell phone or silenced your cell phone, if you can do that, so we don't disrupt the event. And then when we get time to the Q&A, we've got a standing microphone in front of the pillar here. If you can line up to the right of the pillar, be sure to speak into the microphone so everyone can hear your question. We're recording the event, so we want to hear it on the recording as well. If you've not already done so, you can buy the book behind the register. They're on sale there. And after the Q&A, we'll have a signing up here at this table. We'll ask you to line up to the right of the pillar, and we'll come by and ask for personalizations just to speed things up a bit. And we request that you only books be signed today, no other memorabilia or anything like that, and that you can feel free to take pictures throughout the event, but not with the author at the end. And then once the event is complete, if you can fold up the chairs and lean them against something sturdy, that just helps us out a bit. All right, so we're very excited to welcome Miranda July. She's a writer, filmmaker, and artist. Her debut novel, The First Bad Man, was an instant New York Times bestseller. In her collection of stories, No One Belongs Here More Than You, won the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award. Her writing has appeared in the Paris Review, Harper's, and the New Yorker, and her newest book, All Fours, centers around a semi-famous artist who announces her plan to drive across country from LA to New York. 30 minutes after leaving her husband and child at home, she spontaneously exits the freeway, beds down in a nondescript motel, and immerses herself in an entirely different journey. Miranda July is a unique writer, and you can never really have her number. You can try and guess where she is leading you, but you'll be wrong 98% of the time. Seeing where her imagination leaps is a joy as a reader, and this second novel is funny, surreal, and tender. July will be in conversation with Barry Hardiman. Hardiman is the senior editor of the NPR's investigations team. In 2020, she was the editorial lead for election coverage and ran NPR's pop-up talk show during the early days of the coronavirus called The National Conversation for All Things Considered. You can hear Hardiman on the radio talking about everything from Middlemarch to middle grade novels, and she's also a frequent panelist on NPR's podcast, It's Been a Minute, and Pop Culture Happy Hour. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Miranda July and Barry Hardiman.
Hi.
Thanks for coming, everybody. There's a lot of people, a lot of love it. Hi.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
This is uncomfortable, and I'm going to orient myself towards you. So, I loved your book. I read it in 2 sittings, and
wow.
I feel who's read this yet? Anyone yet?
Ooh, wow.
Oh, fabulous. I read it in 2 sittings as though like the way that I read Flowers in the Attic when I was a kid. Like,
wow.
You know what I mean? Like I was hooked, and I realized about halfway through, I was paralyzed. Well, I felt very much like by the end of the book, I was going to have to change something about my life.
Mm.
So you should probably buy this book, is what I'm saying. Unless you're just fine. But I think a lot of people that I know that have read it have had the same experience, reading it as though they're in sort of a fever, because I had never actually seen the experience of a woman in midlife captured in fiction this way with as much honesty. And I think we have to do I know we just heard a synopsis, but this is an extremely sexy, very interior book that follows a narrator through, you just heard that through this experience. And, I have never seen this depicted, and I wondered what depictions you had, what got you here?
Right. It's, I don't know how old you are. You have one of those inscrutable.
47.
Oh, wow.
I'm in the sweet spot. Wait,
okay.
Were you going to say a compliment about my skin?
I was. I had been thinking over there. I was like, I think she's one of those women who's like pale but not wrinkly, which is unusual, frankly.
This is the best moment of my life.
That's not how I plan on starting. So what I was going to say was when I turned 50 this year, but when I was around 40, I started to get this kind of like grim feeling about the future, which was weird for me because I'm so excited about the future generally. Like I'm kind of ambitious and have a lot of energy and don't drink coffee, and I'm just like, let's go, like that's, and so it was kind of caught me by surprise. And I also, there seemed to be this kind of tapering off that was happening in terms of imagery and stories and even just kind of basic information about my body, which was weird because just so recently in my 30s, there was like so much like an over involvement in my reproductive system, and so and the only thing I could think was like the vibe was like, oh, it's so humiliating that we're not talking about it out of respect for you. Like, which, I mean, that's an awful feeling. But meanwhile, me and all my friends were having these really intense conversations about our bodies and our marriages and our desires, and we're kind of questioning everything in this way that felt like radical and alive and kind of actually more interesting than the previous decade. And so I just was like, well, both things are true. We're living in this moment in history, but we are also these women who have never existed before, have never come to this age before. And so and needless to say, I couldn't find a book, it just, wasn't there. And so this book tried to sort of hold all of that, the anxiety, the shame, but also the like radical questioning.
It's funny that you say that about information, because one of the great things about this book is that it contains real information on menopause, like actual list of symptoms, because there's a moment where our narrator is talking to her doctor. And so everybody kind of gets to go to the doctor. And I thought, this is actually really radical, that like we are in the doctor's office, and we're all, and what a sort of a radical act to put all of that. And in particular, there's a visual in the book of it's a graph, which is it looks kind of like the hat in A Little Prince, which is your hormonal drop. And that was the first time I had seen it, and it felt to me that it reflected something that was happening to me. There was and I thought, how great that, because you practice in so many different media, that part of this book is visual. Like that was such a visual moment. But I wondered how you felt about the sort of the information in the book, because I don't think anyone really has. There's like talk of a hot flash in this book, but I don't think anyone had. You're really focused quite. It's really the interior experience of having your identity exploded.
Right. I mean, when I started the book, I began like interviewing gynecologists and naturopaths, and also just women who were older than me, reflecting back on this time, which really the book is, because I'm the age I am and not older, it really concerns perimenopause, like this transitional time. And a lot has actually happened in the last few years. So when I started, I had this feeling of, to quote the eventual cover of the New York Times Magazine that would come out a few years later, women have been misled about menopause. So that came out a few years into me writing, and trying to essentially having the same feeling as Susan Dominus, the writer, New York Times writer of that article, and being kind of like, oh, what? Like, truly this is deeply confusing because there's been misinformation that has not been corrected. And so the actual truth of what we should be doing is sort of the opposite of what you would think. And what a huge oversight, So it's not like I was unique. I was being told this information by other people, but I had this feeling like, oh gosh, I need to get this out, and how interesting to try and do that in a novel. Also pretty hard, especially if you're like truly, a fiction writer. Like I'm an artist, like I'm not, yeah. So after a while, I began to write sort of, well, the article came out and a few other things happened. Like a shift started to happen that I was aware of. And so I unburdened myself. I was like, okay, people can get this information elsewhere. And the things that happen in our bodies, even if it's just like a cold, our experience and our understanding of them has so much to do with like our plans and desires and how this medical thing that happened, impacts those, and those desires are very specific to us. And so it's like a funhouse mirror. Like the idea of trying to be accurate sort of strips it of a necessary story. And then the complication is there's not just one, like anything having to do with the body. Well, there's as many as there are people, like, how sometimes you maybe have like a very different kind of period than your friend, and when you talk about yourself, like when you guys compare, it's so different what happens when you menstruate that you almost get angry at each other. Like
it's true.
Like it's like a different reality, and it feels offensive, well, that's sort of part of this too. So I, unlike anything else I've made where I could just make it up, let's just, go from our feelings here. I had to, I was like, it just doesn't make sense for this. I need there to be the sense that there's this woman and her experience, but there's all these other women in her life and who she's talking to who are having different experiences. And that is also the experience of this time, and frankly, any body transformation.
Right. The diversity of experience that is in the book is really impressive for all the reasons that you say. And, one of the things I'm curious about, I had the feeling as I was reading this that I was sort of inside of maybe some text chains that have been happening over the last couple of years. And I wonder. I was very, very curious about what the actual process of. I don't usually like to ask process questions, but how did you actually? Did this get made in a linear fashion? Were you like beginning to end? Because it. Yeah, I'm just.
No, I mean, I'll try and keep this short because it was 4 years. I will say this. I just kind of. Recently, a journalist said, what was in your original book proposal? Oh. And so I had to dig up my book proposal for this book. And I remember feeling like it was kind of vague and flimsy. I was a little scared. And actually, all the ideas were there, not the story. Like I was trying to sort of tell a story, and there was a lot of elements of it, but it was like this story, but in a dream, like all messed up. But I had for years, at the point where I wrote the book proposal, I had this folder on my desktop called Novel 2. That's like a hopeful title of a file folder, right? Like there will be another one. And I would just, as I worked on my kind of front burner projects at the time, I would just throw anything that seemed interesting to me in there, just a note on whatever. And the topics were all like, aging and femininity specifically, marriage, desire, how all these things change for a woman. And this is me actually just living, right? Mm-hmm. I'm just like, what's everyone else doing and feeling. And when I heard something, I would write it down, or when I got a glimmer. So I guess I already had a couple years of doing that when I wrote the proposal. And I did know the story of her going to the motel. I had the kind of beginning part one in my head, but honestly, the part one is just like a kind of a romance. I don't think that's a spoiler. And my sense at age 45 when I started was like, on some level, my whole life, the consummation of the romance has been the end of the story for me, almost, in different forms, but sometimes creatively, sometimes romantically, but there's this kind of like, and then you get it. You get to have it. And I knew that there couldn't be that I essentially had to sort of grow. So I knew that was the beginning, but I knew that I couldn't know, that I would have to figure out in writing this book, like, what's the expansion? Because if that's the story, I had the sense, I guess, that's the plot we've been given, kind of by men. I hate to say it, but not these specific men in this room, but just, and men have too. It's we're all part of it, right? And so it ends for women in midlife. Like you would have to come up with another sort of structure, or it's already there. It's in you. It's built into you, and it's like a mythology that didn't get, that would be the Greeks. It would be there, except we don't have it to refer back to the sort of. This is too much. You should give me another question, and then I'll say this next part.
Okay.
We need a breath here.
No, I'm always happy to talk about the Greeks, because I was thinking about Medea.
I know nothing about the Greeks.
Well,
that was
like
my signal, my
here.
red light thing going like, what? The Greeks? We'll pull her. And you have no education whatsoever.
Well, I am glad that you mentioned desire, because, like I said, this book is so horny. It is the dirtiest, most delicious, embarrassing, and also sexy.
I'm embarrassed right now.
I'm sorry. Boy, I hope my mom is live streaming this.
The contradiction of.
But that's the thing that's so great, because sex is embarrassing and horny and dirty and all of those things. And I again, you write really well, really viscerally, and it is a romance. And in fact, some of there are many romances in the book, and some of them are consummated and some of them are not. But it is some of the best sex writing I've ever read. And I wondered how you did that. Is that something you were worried about? I'm trying to imagine what it would be like. There are some like, I'm like, I want to know what it felt like to type it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that thing I was saying about like body experiences being this funhouse mirror having to do with like whatever our desires are. Sex is also a body experience, and it's such a weird combination of mind, and body desire. But I think I was confused and interested in that, just in that's addressed head on in the book, the idea of like she thinks there's the narrator, like there's body rooted fuckers and there's mind rooted fuckers, and she's a mind rooted one, kind of, and so it's hard in that sense. Sex is already a fiction, right? Like you're already doing something to get turned on or to turn someone on, or to feel desirable, or so to get. And what I was trying to do was be more honest, right? But how do you be more honest with something that is kind of inherently made up, fictional? So there was, I would write things in a very turned on way quite easily, and then I'd sometimes go back and be like, that's not quite true. That's kind of floating on the river of this like sex fiction. that is real, but I want to try and do one step better. So there was actually a fair amount of rewriting and trying to sort of best my instincts. You would think with sex writing, you could just use your instincts, but they not totally to be trusted here. Yeah.
I think too, I'm used to reading. I have because of the way that men and women then have written about sex. I'm used to reading sex in a certain way, which means sexually, I think in that way now, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to separate those. So that's what I think was so such a revelation, was the idea that you could describe both that and the experience in a way and somehow admit the shame without it being shameful. And that I think it's throughout the book, you do that very well, where it's like, there are so many shameful things, I feel like, about this moment. Your things are breaking down, but at the same time, it isn't. And you did this very well.
Yeah. Sorry. I just thought of something. No, you're probably going to the next question, which is your job, and good, you're doing well at it. But when I have a new thought, like in situ, I'm like, I was just remembering, when you said the shame, I don't think women are that consistent with their desire. Like, why should they be, but getting at that was sort of interesting. And it made me remember that this kind of anxiety of like, what if you can get turned on, but you're not sure you can get turned on in the moment of having sex, So it's sort of like this phantom, that's just one example of a sort of anxiety. But I would occasionally have a conversation with another woman, and I was really asking friends to be very candid at this time, and I would get just enough of a mirror where I'd be like, okay, I'm probably not alone. There's probably at least a handful of people out there who have this. I remember having a friend said, she said, we were talking about like, what do you picture when you're fantasizing, like to turn yourself on? And she's like, oh, I'm always like like Danny DeVito jerking off in the corner. That's me and this is like a beautiful woman, like cascading curls and just like a statue. And she's like, yeah, just with my like runty little putt, I'm just, And I was like, that was so, and it's not like that shocked me. What shocked me was like, you too? Like, and it just seemed so funny. Like, well, we know nothing then. Like this whole, like, we've really gotten sex to quite a fine point given this new information, like that, may not be true at all, or maybe just so kind of hyperfixated on one kind of random thing, maybe,
No, I mean, I think it's really funny because there's this thing about, and I want to leave room for the fact that maybe this is something men experience too, but that the thing of that's very good in this is like, am I going to want it, and am I going to get it? Which is what you get to at a certain age, because you're maybe not desirable. Am I going to get it? But then also I'm going to fall off this cliff of desire. And so am I going to want it? And what I think is so, again, I really just very sharp in this is the idea that it is that the wanting is something that is sort of gasoline for the rest of your life, for your art and for your friendships and for your, all the things that make us. And that is a way of writing about women and desire that I hadn't seen before. Right. The importance of wanting.
Yeah. That's interesting.
I'm sorry, I don't know why.
I mean, we're literally on day 3 of this book existing in the world. Totally. So each one of these interviews, I'm like, it's so new to me that I'm like, right, no, I did write about that. Like, and I'm genuinely like interested to hear it.
Well,
But,
can I go back to Danny
you're the
DeVito?
first person who said that. Yeah.
I because the thing that's so funny about the Danny DeVito thing too is that the other is, again, it's not that this is not a book also like for everybody, sir. I'm sure you felt the same way.
The one person who's read it, yeah.
But you know, it is very much it is certainly focused on women, and you know, there's a way in which the what I felt about the desire and how it was written is it felt sort of almost the way that like traditionally masculine in some ways. There was a kind of, you know, irrepressibility about it. And I thought that was kind of radical. And I wonder, and it made me think about how all the like the gauzy romance of sort of how we talk about sex in our 30s, how we look at it on the screen, how we dress for it, all of that. It doesn't, like, as far as women goes, doesn't really leave room for that sort of Danny DeVito sense. Sorry, Danny DeVito, I'm so sorry. Sense
alive,
of just
right?
like, yeah, oh, very much, I think. Well, I mean, anyway. But you know, that sort of that sense of like of real desire of like nothing is in my way and it's not necessarily pretty. And I can't think of other examples. Are there examples for you that you've read about, not about, that you've read, that you've seen on screen, where you think that you've seen this that what we're talking about, sort of all of these different layers of desire for women?
Right. No, I was reading, actually, when I was sort of first starting to write this and gearing up to, they're very out of print now, but there was used in the 70s, I guess it ended probably sharply when the AIDS crisis began, something called the Gay Sunshine Journals. And these were interviews with sort of the gay male art and literary and film cultural icons of the moment. So like Ginsberg and Jean Genet. Some people were a lot older, but it really, in these interviews, because of the moment that it was in and that they were necessarily political, and the way that they were political was they were also very sexual. It was about the work, but it was also about sex and desire, and in a really practical sense, because a lot of these men, you know, it hadn't always been safe or easy for them to have sex, and so that was part of their biography and part, you know, and so they're very graphic. And I remember thinking like, well, of course these men are like famous. They are still famous white men, and so although in that moment less safe, and I just saw it as like, oh, I need to write in that way, kind of like, as if I will not be dismissed as a woman for writing about this stuff. And I was pretty sure I would be, but I need to write as if, you know, the same way that whatever Ginsberg was talking about his lover's cock or something, you know, just like, and sometimes it was flaccid and sometimes it was standing up, and you know what I mean? Like there was a kind of like, and we know this is part of the work and this was important work, and not that, I mean, you're not going to see this in the book, so gay men don't get disappointed. But I'm just saying, like, you do need a reference, and this wasn't super conscious, but that's what I was reading. Yeah.
It's really, that really does come through. I don't want to spend the whole conversation talking about sex, but I also do. But I one of the there are so many parts of this, and again, obviously, the desire feels very relevant to all of these things. But one of the other things that is, again, very, very present in this is that you're very good about writing about this very specific experience of trying as a woman at this age. Writing about being available to the different parts of your life, and when you have, whether it is a partner or child or your muse or your job or your friends, that, you know, there's a kind of there's an availability that you sort of get used to, I feel like, in your 30s. You're like, I guess I'm just gonna have to carry this baby around and like and wipe the butt and do the thing and then be at work on time maybe. And you know, and there's something really wonderful about how you manage, or this character manages to well, you write about that feeling really well, but also manages to sort of get room by the end of the book. And I kept thinking about that, by the way, thinking about room, because when I remember as a young person reading Virginia Woolf or Room of One's Own, had I read that, they should assign that to 47-year-old women, you know, but she really does manage to get some space. And, you know, as I have to imagine, I know people talk about, is this book about you? Is that, and whether it's autobiographical or not, it's clearly very personal. And so I wonder about that, how, if this is a feeling you have felt of trying to balance availabilities. That's not a great word for what I'm saying, but also, and how, and finding room within that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's a fiction, so the story's fictional, but that's such a big theme. And honestly, so much of my life and my career has been about making room in a really obvious way. Like, you know, I'm a filmmaker, writer, and artist, and I never really thought about that. I mean, I thought about it in the sense of like, you know, when I had success with my first movie and it was like, oh, you get to be an indie filmmaker now. It felt too small because I was like, but I've been writing and doing performance and all, you know, it's like, that box actually, so I like had to make decisions, say no to certain things and work on things that no one cared about initially in that moment to make more room. And I just did it and pushed against. Yeah, what I didn't do was any of that in my private life. I felt like, and you know, I feel very lucky to have had the romantic relationships that I've had, the marriage that I had, but just to be honest, I thought I was really lucky to get to have this large career and the normal things. Like, I thought that was a huge win. I mean, my mom didn't even come close to really having that, you know? And it was. Like, I am really lucky. I was really lucky. But I think what started to happen was that sense of luckiness kind of ran out at a certain point. Like, it didn't seem like a big enough space anymore. And I really began to wonder, like, why wouldn't I have made it up the way I made up the other part of my life? And so that, I didn't know all that when I started the book, but there was a parallel process of living, you know, and with this book as a companion, and quite often the only place that all these thoughts and conversations and true, like, dark nights, you know, lived was in the book. So in a way, the book, like, one way in that it's fiction is like it actually made room for me, you know, like a lot of the biggest changes in my life happened like since I finished I've had a year since the book. So it was such a strange process, but and the stakes did feel very high because of that. But I knew I wasn't alone. That was the weird thing. Like, it wasn't like a weird Miranda July thing, you know, like it was the strange sense of like, I think this might be a collective experience. Like, I could be wrong and definitely a risk, and things might go very badly. And that feeling is also in the book, the fear of sort of being cast out or just being alone, just being kind of outside of the structures that maybe we need to get through life, right? So yeah, anyways, that was.
Do you think that those, one, because there's a lot of interesting thinking about monogamy and marriage and where you can fit. I and then I hear you, the way in which you talk about also your art, and you have so many different ways of, you're particularly generative artist, in different forms, and I wonder if there's something about, I found myself really envying your different ways of being able to express the things that were happening, because what I've found in my own experience and what I've heard from my friends are that there is this sort of, it's like an identity shift, but it's more like an identity split, where lots of parts of you that all seemed like they were all together become, and I thought, oh gosh, don't worry. I was like, I got to start making a film and like doing it. Like I need more places to be myself. And
not worried.
Yeah, I didn't mean it like that. But like I did have this feeling of like, oh, there need to be more places, and I wonder if that conversation can happen outside of the conversation about monogamy and marriage.
Right. It's funny. I think that because like polyamory and stuff is so kind of in the cultural consciousness right now, which is I read those articles too, but I was trying to get like yes, there's a level at where it's like, oh, I want to fuck someone new, but that's a very it's kind of a scary guiding light. You know what I mean? Like it seems, I think for good reason, you're nervous about whether that's maybe going to head you into a very alone place. You know what I mean? So what do you do? Like it isn't really a book about blowing up your life like that. I'm sure there's like 5,000 of those being written down. Those, there's an energy to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I always felt like, well, the security, and I want security, right? Like that was, like the reason for the different career, different art practices. Really, I had a lot of anxiety about losing my way as an artist, like sort of having to make something and not having it in me to make it. And so one reason I kept going the way I always did was I was like, well, I'm not buying on credit, I'm not buying on someone else's permission. I'm at least I know how to do this, and I can, at least I know I'll be able to find my way, and it's similar with this stuff. Like so I guess in the end, it's like a self intimacy, like, and trying to go from that place, and yes, lust I think is part of it, especially like when you're talking about hormones and this. But maybe it's meant to be, in the same way that like, puberty, like we every time we turn on the radio, we hear a love song that is essentially a teenage love song, right? It's like that's the energy. And it's still exciting to us, right? Because that's like all of music. Apparently, it's still exciting, and we would never say, "Oh, that's really just hormones." That's not real. Like, kind of all love stories are a hormone story. So, getting a little close to losing what the hell I was saying. It was substantive. Let me just think for one sec. So tired. Oh yeah. Well, no, I don't think I'm going to pull this one off. The idea is there, but like, I've flown 3 times in 3 days.
Get it.
Okay, well, anyways, a point, not the one I was making, but a related point is has to do with hormones. Oh gosh, good thing this is like a slightly more modest side. It's intimate. We're all friends here, and it's being recorded to the internet. Well, okay, so the end. New point is the idea that this time, this perimenopausal time, is in fact just reduced to hormones, and that's part of what feels so bad about it. It's like, imagine saying to a teenager, like, nope, you're not coming into yourself. It's all science, and a lot of bad stuff can happen now. Things that could really derail your whole life. Like, actually, no, there's a whole mythology about this time that kind of gets them like really revved up and exciting. When they have an exciting feeling, there's a whole bunch of things out there in culture from all time to guide them and meet the moment and even get them more excited. And I think that's one thing I felt was missing, was like, what is that story? Yeah.
I will say, I think very much that we talk about the puberty as like, you have your whole life ahead of you.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I did think of the thought. The thought was just that maybe it's not accidental, the hormonal fluctuations, and that those can cause this sort of almost puberty-like, craziness and sort of lustful feelings sometimes, or rockiness, because maybe it is a time, if there had been stories all along, maybe the story would be, oh yes, this is a time where things are necessarily kind of shaken up, because it's really important at this time that you don't just stick to the same story that brought you here and allowed you to make a safe world, maybe for yourself or your child. Now, for the second half of your life, for what you need to do next, it's important that you get unstuck from that. So biologically, things will shift, and you need to heed that, because this next chapter, which ends in death, is important. It's not nothing. In fact, it's very important. So now is the time to sort of set your course. Okay.
No, that's exactly. And I thank you for contributing to the mythology that I think people will allow women and the men who love them, and
and the men, like, I can't tell you the number of times I've now had, I mean, it's not been that many because the book just came out, but more than once, which I thought was a lot, that a man has come up to me and said, I think I might be a perimenopausal woman. Which isn't so weird when you think about all the male archetypes and fictional figures that I have seen myself in and that I've been inspired by and guided by, and men have been robbed of that, like, so there's a lot there, and I don't think there's nothing, I mean, seems somehow funny, but it's like, I mean, I've identified with Dawn Draper,
oh my God,
I mean? Like, the things that I've managed to identify with in moments that because it doesn't matter. Like, it is a human experience. We have some of these qualities, in us, okay.
No, I think it is a crisis in midlife, and it happens for a lot of people, and it's an opportunity for your next 50 years. Anyway, thank you for doing that. I'm going to open up this for other people. Come on up. I don't know where the microphone is. Oh, it's right there. Hi.
It's been said that some of the best sex is when done for purposes of procreation. And given the decade of life that you write about, do you cover issues of IVF and late pregnancy?
Oh, I don't actually, but there is birth stuff in there, because the narrator had this fetal maternal hemorrhage, as did I. So there's some pretty intense birth stuff. Not that specific story, but I guess I tried to hold a lot of trauma that I think by the time you've gotten to this point in life, there's often been a lot of trauma, and a lot of it around birth or conception for women. And so I do think that's part of the story. Like, I didn't want the body, that this lusting woman's body, to be like brand new. No, it's holding a lot of pain and a lot of experience. So yeah, thank you for that point. Yeah.
Come on, guys. I'll just keep going.
Hi. You said that the novel took about like 4 years for you to write. Do you have a process? Do you have a desk, sit down in the morning and write, or what's the technique?
Right. Well, I'll tell you one thing. For this book, because that baby had been born, my baby, who's now 12, since my baby was born in the middle of writing my last book. So the way I thought of it was like, well, for the last novel, I got to have a lot of mornings where you just wake up and pull your computer into bed, which is the best way to start writing, right? You're barely conscious and you just go until it runs out or you get hungry. And I was like, well, I got to do that, for about half of the last book, but I won't get to do that for even a single day for this book, which worried me. And so I made an arrangement. I just said to my partner, my co-parent at the time, still my co-parent, my pal, I said, what if I spent Wednesday nights in my studio? And then every Thursday morning I can pull the computer in bed. And I think I might need to do that to write this novel, which at the time was like a purely practical, like, I just need to squeeze a little more time out of the day. I will do pickup Thursday, I'll be done, I'll wrap it up. Of course, that it's like you pull it one thread, like we did that. And it wasn't a big deal. Actually, everyone was sort of excited by like Wednesday nights, or like this special night. But it's like, yeah, all my friends were kind of like, wait, you what? I didn't know that was a thing you could get. Just Wednesday nights off? Like, and it wasn't, I didn't come into it that way, but it did kind of open up, sort of made you think like, well, what other things are we doing that maybe neither person is so invested in that we, that's not how it happens in the book. But since you asked about the process, that was a big part of it. Other than that, like, just I get as far away from the internet as I can, which means like locking up my phone and unplugging it. And I don't drink coffee. It's not that interesting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. I apologize if you alluded to this while I was going around trying to get here, but seeing as you're an artist who dips in and out of multiple forms, filmmaking, writing novels, writing short fiction, everything, I was wondering if this, whatever was the spark for this novel, like the original sort of, whatever you want to call it, nugget of an idea, if there was any point where you thought of going in a different direction from turning it into a novel, like having making it into a film, or even just compressing it into kind of a short story or something else, a performance, anything. And if not, if you were always sure that it was going to be a novel, why really?
Yeah, I know it must seem so kind of mystical and like a free for all, like with these different mediums. It's not. It's like I just alternate between movies and books because they take so long that, like, if I were to make 2 movies in a row, then instead of saying it's been almost 10 years since her last book, people would be like, it's almost 20 years. Like it just, and like some part of me, it's not just that I don't want to like lose my writer card or something. I also like the muscles, the process. I just don't want to go that long, but without the experience of it thus far. I reserve the right to do anything tomorrow. And then art and performance, I mean, frankly, because like I don't make any money from those things, but I still do them. Like I can tend to fit that, I just, like, for example, between the book being finished and it coming out, I've just worked on art and have a show up in Milan, but I barely squeezed that in that year, but it was really wonderful to be that free as far as like, art is the thing that it's not as defined as like a book is always looks, this whole store represents books. I mean, it's free within there. I don't know. We could argue that. Anyway, so yeah, I always knew it was a novel two, and I always do kind of know, and I may get an idea for something in another medium, but I just put that in another file folder till I get to that, till a time in my life where I can do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. I was the only thing I read by you is The Metal Bowl, the story.
All right.
And I have seen your movies and I love them. And what I like about that story and your movies is how honest they are. And what I think is very interesting is that you do this thing where the characters clearly have a lot in common with you, but they don't feel myopic, and the stories don't feel myopic. Like you're just like the vision of the main character doesn't become the whole world, or doesn't like what you were saying about like different experiences. And I was wondering, like, is that intentional, or do you take care of that, or that's just happen?
Right. Yeah, it's funny. So The Metal Bowl is this short story it was like the thing I wrote before this book, and it was a little bit of a departure. It's funny, you've only read these two things. So everything else, if anyone knows, is kind of a little more unreal. Like the characters are less like me. They are, at heart, I think you can really feel me in there, but they're just a little less maybe relatable, and they can get away with saying things and doing things that you're like, well, I do say and do that, but I'm not that weird, kind of a little bit like that. And with The Metal Bowl, for some reason, I just started writing this like more embarrassing kind of short story. It's actually more common. It's like, yeah, if you're, a 40-year-old woman with a husband and a child, your short story is a 40, and like that's what fiction kind of is generally, Yeah. But for me, I was like, how do you, I know it's fiction, but how do I prove that? Like without the, so I was very nerve-wracked by that. But when that story came out, it did connect in a weird way. Like all these women sort of peers of mine wrote me in a way they hadn't before. I mean, people are nice enough, but they hadn't written me like with their own story, with this kind of urgency to reveal something from themselves. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe that's what you get, like from this kind of rawness or risk, maybe you get risk back. And so that was kind of the seed for this book, that voice anyways. And then, yeah, it's like, then I took it a little further and I didn't name the character. I didn't come up with a job. I kind of leave it a bit loose, a bit like my job. And that was sort of, like there's some great books in here that are memoir and autofiction. And I love those books because you're like, yeah, this is like, there's skin in the game here. Like this really, we're not just making shit up, but I don't do well like this. I get all inspired and I try and write like that. And then it's like my plane won't lift off, and it actually ends up being less truthful, less honest, less alive. So I, did a kind of weird thing that's probably confusing for everyone, but I think it works, which is just kind of have it feel, I took that character, that sort of me-like character, and then I just went ahead and do what I do, which is she can do anything she wants. And I have to also make it fiction because I, protecting my life and my privacy. So there you go.
You had a question. Did you want to Hello. I've been a big fan for many years. Thank you for coming to DC.
Oh, thank you.
I'm a midwife in Baltimore, and I'm really looking forward to reading the book, especially the GYN portion. I found with my own friends a shared community and going through, the transition of midlife as well. And I'm just wondering, my question is your dedication, Isabel. Is this somebody who is important in your life who shared? I guess so. I mean, if you named her, can you speak to that?
Yes, I miss her. This is my best friend, Isabel Albuquerque. I left off her last name because I was like, she's such a force in her own right. I kind of didn't want to fully contaminate her with the fiction here. But there's a best friend character in the book named Jordy, who's a sculptor, as Isabel is. The truth is, Jordy's like an amalgam of a lot of friends, but I dedicated it to Isabel because Isabel and I talked about all these things, and because a lot of the time I was writing, it was the pandemic. She was really the only friend I met with for some of the years, and we met every week. And some of the really specific conversations about, for example, what would we do if we lived more according to our cycles and didn't perform sameness, but in fact, what if we allowed ourselves permission to be different at different times of the month and maybe different times of life? Those are real conversations. I mean, not what's in the book, but we had long versions of those conversations over weeks, and we'd sort of do experiments and like try living different ways, and so, yeah, that's the dedication. I could not have really conceived of so much or changed my own life so much without her. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm so looking forward to reading All Fours. So my question has to do with your description. There was a recent interview with Alexandra Schwartz, and you were describing working with Deborah Winger on Kajillionaire. And I just thought the Deborah Winger character was fascinating and possibly a really good contrast to your new protagonist. And I wonder if you had any reflections on, because the character is so cruel. And the new protagonist, I'm so looking forward to seeing how she engages with her passion.
Right. And Deborah was, wonderfully willing and interested in playing this kind of cruel mom. And wearing no makeup and, kind of just dug into the whole thing. I mean, one of the parts of writing or making anything is like you're working from your unconscious, and it's like, I'm sure a lot of you know this, it's sort of a delicate thing. Like you need to know enough to be aware and to write many drafts and rewrite, but you also need to not know you can't know everything, right? You don't, it's like if you pretend to know everything, then you've sort of killed the mystery and the kind of question mark and curiosity of the whole thing, which is a fancy way of saying like, oh God, I think this is a pretty naughty territory for me as far as my own family and like sort of generations of women, and like that mom's not my mom at all. Very like that I can say for sure. My mom's very warm, but yeah, there's a lot there that stays. I mean, Kajillionaire is a very like insane sometimes that you can make a movie that has like stars in it and costs millions of dollars and still let some of it be submerged in mystery, which is to say, like, I'm still kind of unpacking like what I'm saying there. Okay.
Thank you. I'm so looking forward to seeing the contrast in the characters.
Yes.
Hi, congratulations. Thank you for sharing all your art with the world. It really inspires and touches me deeply. I wanted to ask, I think making art is very difficult and it's very risky, and it's not like you just get a job and you get promoted and you make money. It's if people don't like it, they don't like it, and you might not make money. Can you talk about your coming to become an artist and being like, this is what I need to do, this is what I'm going to do, and not take some other traditional route? Because I think a lot of us do have art and we want to make it, but we're just too scared, or we can't, or
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. I know it's interesting because I now have a 12-year-old who's an artist, and I don't quite know how to say, like, I'm not the best example. Like, it's super unlikely this isn't even really a path, like, but your parents are sort of role models. And luckily there's another parent, they actually just said the other day, well, Papa's saying that I should go to college, but you dropped out and you don't seem to think it matters that much. And I was like, well, the wonderful thing is you have both of us and you're your own person. And, it's like, I have no idea. We may all, college might not even matter. And by then, I'm in darkness there. But I guess, speaking of parents, like my own parents were writers, both of them, and did not ever have the kind of success where you could make a living from it, but wrote every day and still write every day. And that was my primary example. I mean, that's what I grew up with. So it wasn't, and they ran a publishing company out of our house. And it was people that they met and found interesting. And there was some aspect of it that was sort of serving the community, initially, like, and I mean, not just initially, but, it starts small. And I think that model, like when I very first began, initially my idea was like, I want to be a director, right? I can't be a writer because my parents were writers and I kind of rebel. But the idea of making a movie, like you said, it just seemed impossible. Like even just a short movie. And so I started this thing when I was 20. I had dropped out of school called Joni for Jackie, which was just this simple thing. If a woman sent me a tape with her short movie, VHS tape, I would put it on a tape collected with 9 other movies and send the tape back to her so she could see her work and other women's work, because there was no YouTube or anything. And I thought, well, the thing that I need is to have some kind of context. And also, I think this is a bit unconscious, to feel like sort of like I had something, like I was in charge of something. When I was in charge of this made-up distribution system, this sort of job. And the nice thing about it was, like, it did create the context. It did give me confidence because I was offering something. And I didn't have, I did start to make my own short movies and put them on those tapes and do some things with it, but it wasn't so focused on like whether my thing was good enough. It was kind of like, well, gotta get the new batch of tapes out to the women, which may have been a little bit of like a pantomime, like when you're playing Job as a kid, like I gotta stamp this, it's all very official. But it also, I think maybe that's what a lot of the world is this sort of sense of importance, and some people are born with a ton of it and they don't even need to do something like that. They're just like, everyone listen up, and so I guess I still do tend to think, and I said this to my child the other day, I was like, I bet you'll be really good at like seeing what's missing and what you could offer and what you want, and you're such a leader and you're so good at kind of making communities and stuff. I bet that will feel really good for you, or something like that, a little less annoying, we hope. Anyways, I do think that the people that I see who do that, when things don't work out, because they're constantly not working out, like ideas change and aren't what you thought they were. Like, no, actually, like things are going great. I also didn't get an award that I spent so long on applying for, last year. You know what I mean? Like things are just always not working out. Then you just keep going. Anyways, the point is, if you have the thing you made, the context, I don't know, that doesn't work for everyone, but I feel like in this moment with the ability to get famous overnight, sort of always there, like you failed if you didn't do that, with the internet and stuff. It's like I'm 200 years old, with the World Wide Web, okay. Anyways, yeah, it's just good to remember that sort of grassroots thing is still true. That's in fact why the internet is so successful, is because we do still have that built into us. It's founded on that.
Cool. Thank you so much.
All right, that's all we've got time for, I'm afraid. So thank you so much. Can we have a round of applause for Miranda and for Barry?
Thank you. Thank you so much.